Hello, and again, we're watching the midday view on eNCA, DSTV channel 43. We are talking about how Mozambique has become a significant heroin transit route. I mean, if you think about it, it is like an international kind of crime novel of sorts, if I may say so. You've got this heroin all the way going from Afghanistan to Pakistan, all the way on dhows, all the way to Mozambique, on the road from there, northern Mozambique, to Johannesburg in South Africa, and then to Europe. And governing party in Mozambique, Frelimo, accused of having these alleged links and facilitating and benefiting from it. And you've got a country like South Africa, who's ruled by the ANC, that is an ally, of course, a liberation movement ally of Frelimo, being there, supporting that war against Cabo Delgado. But the drugs are still flowing. It's a big business, and those who are in political power sort of collaborating with the criminals. It's a tragedy, Moeletsi.
It's an absolute tragedy. And on top of it, the fact that our own government is protecting the regime in Mozambique, which is killing, literally killing our own young people in South Africa. We call heroin here in Nyaupe, as you know. This is an epidemic, especially amongst young black people in the townships in this country. And here is the South African army going to Mozambique to defend the same regime that is poisoning young people in South Africa.
David Matsinhe, the impact on the ground, I mean, Moeletsi is saying on the ground in South Africa, of course, we know how bad drugs are. What's the impact? What are you seeing on the ground from an Amnesty International perspective, but you as a Mozambican human rights activist, what is the impact of this ongoing corruption that's so closely linked with the heroin drug trade?
Let me just say, Mozambique has become a global player in drug trafficking because it's not only drugs from Asia. There are drugs coming from Latin America as well. Recently, there was a number of containers in Brazil found by the Brazilian police that were destined for Mozambique, and from Mozambique, who knows where they were going. A few years back, there was a group of Mexicans found producing drugs in Maputo, and I don't know what happened to that. But the impact of all of this is that the Mozambican government, the Mozambican authorities have shifted their focus in fulfilling human rights, in protecting human rights. So that means what they should be doing in terms of building schools, hospitals, training teachers, all of that is left behind because they are preoccupied in collaborating and facilitating these kinds of trade. That is the impact that you can expect from a government like that. Unfortunately, the peer review mechanism that was created, some decades back to hold African governments accountable is not being used. Not even here at Southern Africa region, it's not being used. These comrades are not holding each other accountable with the mechanism that they themselves have put in place.
Joe, in your article that I read, in your paper that you wrote for the London School of Economics in 2018, you talk about how the South Africans are really not doing much to stop the secretive heroin exports from Mozambique via Johannesburg to Europe because it's supposed just to pass here. I mean, from what you know today, have other South African law enforcement agencies really doing something?
They don't seem to be, but I think the change to crystal meth will make a major difference because most of the trade in the past was heroin, which passed through South Africa without much falling off the back of the lorry, and most of it went to Europe. Now about half of the trade is crystal meth, which is produced also in Afghanistan, very easy to produce from a local shrub. And that goes to South Africa. So that's very specifically feeding a South African drug market. And I think that must frighten the South African authorities. But we've seen no evidence yet of any pressure on the Mozambicans to stop the trade.
So, I mean, what can be done here? Can we begin with the President Filipe Nyusi's government? Joe, earlier you said from the past 2 decades, there was this kind of connections with one particular family, MBS, that's Bashir Suleiman's company, with the likes of the former President Joaquim Chissano, was at the wedding, and the likes of the former President Armando Emilio Guebuza, who was at the launch of a big opening of a shopping center. The new government, President Filipe Nyusi, are they doing anything to stop this? I mean, the war in Cabo Delgado is continuing, and when they raid some of the bases, former bases of the insurgent, they are finding heroin and cocaine.
Yes, but what the war has actually done has shifted the route, so that the dhows used to come south only to Cabo Delgado province. Then the heroin was put on local boats and then onto lorries and so on and down to South Africa. Now, because of the war, the trade has shifted south. So now the dhows are going a bit further to Nampula province and even as far as Zambezia. But there have been a few seizures, but it's clear that the Mozambican authorities are not intervening to stop this. It's just too profitable. And the South Africans are they're doing some checks on what goes across the border, but not very much. And it is difficult. You can't check every vehicle that goes across the border and look inside the door panels of every Land Rover that goes through the border. And that's often how this is transported in quite small quantities. But it's a major trade, and it would need international pressure. And South Africa was so anxious to get its troops into Cabo Delgado, which Mozambique didn't really want anyway, that it was hardly going to say, well, stop the drug trade, when Mozambique would have been happy to say, well, fine, don't send troops. I mean, Mozambique is happy with the Rwandans. It never wanted the SADC troops. And it was forced in a way to take them so that South Africa doesn't have leverage about sending the troops.
What does it tell us? What does it tell us, Moeletsi? I mean, what Joe has just said.
Well, to me, it's telling a very frightening story of collusion between the two governments, Mozambique and South Africa, turning a blind eye to the drug trade. 2 or 3 years ago, the Americans caught somebody who was exporting heroin from South Africa to the United States. They sent their own agents to come and arrest this man. And they collaborated with the South African police, with the Hawks, to arrest a Nigerian. His name was called Anyauko. And this man was deported to the United States, where he was sentenced in a court in New York. Why is the South African government not demanding that this Bashir Suleiman must be deported to South Africa? Then I ask myself, is the ANC also benefiting? Is it also getting a cut from this, from Frelimo, from this drug profits? That's point number one. Point number two, which makes me even more suspicious, there is a minister of finance who is in prison in South Africa as I'm talking to you. He has been in prison since 2018.
December 2018.
December 2018.
The former finance minister of Mozambique, Manuel Chang.
Yes. Now, the Americans demanded that this man must be arrested and deported to America in connection with corruption over the...
Yeah, that's the hidden debt that Joe Hanlon was referring to. That $2 billion debt, bulk of which came from Credit Suisse.
Yes. Now, the South Africans arrested this minister. Instead of deporting him to the United States, they want to send him back to Mozambique, where he is not wanted He's not on trial.
He's not been charged with anything.
He's not been charged with anything. They want to send him back. So my conclusion is that they don't want him to be sent to America, because when the Americans try him, he might reveal who benefits from the drug trade between Mozambique and South Africa. And the South African ruling party might be implicated, or some of his personalities might, which is why they don't want to send him to America to go and stand trial. Because they did send the Nigerian to America to go and stand trial.
David, let me bring you in here. I mean, when you hear this possibility of a benefit that spreads beyond the borders of Mozambique, of this drug trade, that Joe Hanlon says is very profitable and still going on, your human rights struggle, or your struggle for human rights, where does it stand? I mean, northern Mozambique currently is burning. The Rwandans are on the ground. The insurgents are being pushed back. The drug trade is moving further south to Nampula and even to Zambezi province, according to Joe Hanlon, and it's not stopping. But I mean, your efforts for human rights, I mean, when you hear this, do you just stick your hand up and say, you give up?
Absolutely not. This is disappointing, because governments are the ones that have the duty to protect and fulfill human rights. And when you have these states overrun by, drug lords and trafficking, that means you have weakened government whose duty to fulfill human rights is undermined. Now we are speaking about Mozambique. But according to the studies that are coming out, the problem is festering, it is expanding, and it is intensifying because of the money that is there to be made. Now we're talking about Mozambique, and we're talking about South Africa. Next, we will be talking about other SADC countries. That means you will have a group of states within this region unable to provide the services that they should be providing to their people, because they have been overrun and captured by, organized crimes such as, drug lords, because they have done their homework and they are smart, and they have seen that SADC is one of the weakest regions in Africa. For example, Rwanda was able to do in a few weeks what SADC could not do in 3 years in Cabo Delgado. That's proof that we are in serious problem.
We're in serious problem. And for you, David, in terms of your human rights activity, the struggle continues. In the last 2 minutes we've got left here, very quick final comments, remarks. This is like a tragedy of note that's expanding and developing, as you say, David. Joe, let me end off with you very briefly. This will require a lot of political will to be resolved.
It requires a political will to move away from this belief that the market is everything. Because for the Mozambican elite, heroin is just another trade, it's another business. It's like oil or rubies or any of these things. It's a market. And all of Mozambique's main advisors in the West say, yeah, sure, be capitalist, have a small government. And it requires a change in thinking that not all business is the same, and that Mozambique has to have some control over this business, and it's not just about profit.
Not just about profit. David, your parting word very quickly.
I urge African governments, especially in this region, to work together to arrest this problem, because it's festering quickly and it will undermine the ability of these governments to protect their own people.
Okay, finally, you, Moeletsi, in the studio.
My position is we should withdraw our army from Mozambique. We should demand that Bashir Suleiman,
Mohamed Bashir Suleiman
should be deported to South Africa to come and stand trial. And Manuel Chan, the minister, must go to the United States and stand trial so that we find out what really are South African involvement in the heroin trade, South African government official involvement in the heroin trade.
Thank you very much. There, we're going to leave it for now. We've